We're rolling.
Okay.
So today is the 27th of March, 2018, and we are in Minneapolis at the JCC, correct?
Yes.
Tamar and Suzanne
Fenton?
Fenton, is that? Fenton.
Yes.
Okay. And we're here to talk about your father, right?
Yes.
So will you please give me the dry facts about your father? His name, where he was born, where he grew up, what kind of upbringing?
So his given name was Dennis Julian Fertelman. His father was an Orthodox rabbi in London and Leeds mostly.
Okay, so, wow. So your father was first generation, born in America.
He wasn't born in America.
He was born
in London. Yes. Youngest of 4 children, raised in a very Orthodox home. What happened was that his father was moving around being a rabbi, and then the war happened and the Blitz happened in London where they were living, and my dad and the brother that was just a few years older than him, David, were evacuated to an area in Cornwall.
Which is Wales, I think?
In the south.
Yeah, Wales, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was called Helston.
Helston, okay.
In Cornwall. And eventually, and they were put in different homes, and their mother and her sister also eventually were sent to the area as well, but they weren't living in the same home.
Okay.
So
Which was very common at the time.
Very common, but very uncomfortable for Orthodox people to be living in a home. He talked about how he saw the people he was living with skin a rabbit and cook it. It was, obviously they weren't living their normal lives there, but they were surviving and they had a safe place. But his mother got very sick, and she died.
During the war?
Of cancer. And so he was just a little boy at the time. And so
what year was he born?
He was born in 1931.
1931.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
September 30th, 1931. So they sent him and the other brother back to London to live with their father. And within 6 months, their father died of a stroke. So there were 4 orphaned children. However, the 2 older ones were already out of the house because they
could work.
They could work, right.
What number was your father?
He was 4.
Youngest.
Yeah. So the community where their father, his name was Rabbi Ben Sion Fertelman, where he had been the rabbi, raised money to support the children and to put them in yeshiva and all of these things, and they were sent to live with their mother's sister and her husband.
Where?
In London. A family called the Fishers. Okay, so my dad talked about the Fishers the way he would compare them to the Dursleys in Harry Potter, like living under the cover, like not treated well at all, and basically the second they could send the 2 boys away, they did.
To boarding school.
To boarding school.
Never visited them.
Right, and they basically took the money for themselves and sent the boys off to boarding school. I do want to mention one thing that happened during World War II when my dad was back in London with his family. He remembers that his parents took in many children from the Kindertransport, and that he talked about how, even though he was very young, how moved he remembered it. It was a seminal memory for him.
Well, he didn't know what was going on, but he talked about that there were different kids always in the house.
And that
didn't make sense.
And that all of his toys were given to them.
One of the fighter pilots, Machal fighter pilots that I interviewed, Hugo Maron, who was from Czechoslovakia and spent the whole war in London. He was sent on the Kindertransports. So, and then he later became a very well-known pilot or whatever, but
so
he ended up somewhere in also his stories are insane, but
right, I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in Czechoslovakia will play into this story.
Yes, it does. It does.
Okay.
So in fact, one of the girls who they couldn't pronounce her name, who had come on the Kindertransport, they renamed her Jeanette, and she became like the family housekeeper. So she lived with them for quite a while, and he had very fond memories of her.
Okay, but
Anyway.
Right, yes.
So I'm bringing up the Kindertransport because that plays into it later too, his very deep understanding of the Holocaust and what people were going through, even though he was very young at the time.
So I'll just jump in for 1 second, and I think, so my dad kind of was disconnected from his family. They were sent
To boarding school?
to boarding school with his brother, who he did not get along with. And
Him and his brother didn't get along?
No.
No, not at all. And they never did. Actually.
If they didn't then you know.
No, because my dad never forgot how the brother would, tell him he wasn't, davening deeply enough and just was
Always
over
on him.
Yeah, always on
him.
Okay.
On
So-
one thing or another.
So he didn't, so I only talk about this because I think that all of this led to my dad wanting to leave and wanting to just go have a higher purpose. I mean, I don't think he felt connected to anything in London at the time.
Right. Except for his oldest brother, whose name is Ivor.
And sister, who was actually part of the whole recruitment.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was close to his older brother, but so he's off at boarding school,
Right.
and he was sent to Perse School, Cambridge, which is part of Cambridge University, but it was like the boarding school for boys. And there were very few Jewish kids there,
I can imagine.
obviously, and certainly not kids from Orthodox backgrounds, but by then, he wasn't really
He was
living.
really practicing.
Yeah, not at all. I think, if he had
Just surviving.
Yes, surviving with no parental support, and as Suzanne said, the relatives, holidays would come, the school would close down, and they
Nobody
wouldn't
would visit.
They
He
wouldn't
was
pick him
just
up.
left.
He would just be left there with a few other kids
And
to
his
be
brother.
cared for by the nuns,
Yeah.
whoever Okay, so really bad situation. But
I was just gonna say, and then he got older, and
So
brother-
19. Well, hold on. In 1947, he said he told us he built like they weren't allowed radios, but he built a crystal set, he called it. And he said that he actually was listening to the partition, the resolution, UN
29th
resolution.
of November 1947.
Yep, Resolution 181 to partition Palestine. And he was listening to the vote intently and knew when it passed that there was going to be war in Israel. But he was 15 at the time. So that summer, he was in London. And I don't know where he was staying, but he was asking around for
his brother.
his oldest brother, Ivor.
And nobody knew where he was. And my dad got kind of suspicious about the whole thing.
Right. He assumed that Ivor had somehow made his way to Palestine, because it was still Palestine at the time. So
But no one was talking.
no one was giving any information, and he was
I
just
think it
a
was
kid.
illegal. I don't even think you were allowed to talk about it.
It was,
Well, 47, it was still British mandate.
yeah, you could go and you can get a visa. It was not easy, but that's when the embargo kind of started and things were, but please continue. So he's kind of figuring out where his older brother is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And their oldest sister, who had actually been out of the house for many years. So he didn't have much of a relationship with her, but she was working for, I think it was called Hapoel HaMizrach in London, working with Haganah, people who had come to London. Yes, to recruit people, mostly World War II veterans, which is what they needed.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't need a 15-year-old boy.
No.
But he kept going there and talking to her, and he said,
To his sister.
to his sister, who
Yeah.
was working in the office there, and as he said, I kept seeing these tan, good-looking men with accents, foreign accents, and I kept trying to talk to them to tell them I want to go to Israel, I want to go to Israel, and they wouldn't give him the time of day because he was just a kid.
Yeah.
So, do you want to pick up any of the story, or should I continue?
Someone told him something because he then made his way down to France.
Oh, okay. There's a lot that happens before then. Sorry. So he keeps telling them, I want to join. Send me to Israel. I want to fight. They don't talk to him. So then he says to them, but I'm a pilot. And they say, you're a pilot? We need pilots. Now, he was not a pilot.
He had ROTC for
ROTC, I
maybe
know.
a semester.
Right.
Or like a little possibly a couple weeks
Right,
at the boarding school.
We think that maybe he had been up in a plane, a tiger moth, but we're not even sure about that. But at this Perth School, Cambridge, he was part of the
like ROTC.
Yeah, similar to ROTC, and he said he trained with the Cambridge University pilots.
Yes.
Training is the operative word.
He's embellished.
Yeah, but he knew a little bit about flying.
Okay.
And he knew a little bit he knew how to handle a rifle and a Sten gun, because he did learn that in his training. So he tells them he's a pilot and he'll do whatever it takes. He wants to fly for Israel. So then they start listening to him. And they say, okay, first they tell him, go to Williston's London Synagogue for medical appointment and shots. So they had turned this synagogue, and maybe others as well, into these like recruitment centers with doctors there and giving shots. And he said he could tell who was on their way to Israel because they were walking around with sore arms, because everyone had these shots. So they tell him to go to it was at Marks and Spencer's. There was a recruitment area there, so he had to go have a secret meeting there, and he kept having to convince them that
he was a pilot.
That he was a pilot, but also that he was Jewish, and that he wasn't a spy, and all of these things that he kept having to prove, and he had to show that he knew Hebrew, and he kept saying, my father was a rabbi, and trying to really convince them that he was prepared to go. He certainly had nothing to stay back in London for, but he did have this idea that Ivor was already there. So they sent him, gave him a one-way ticket to Paris. They gave him the name of a contact and the address.
In the south of France?
No, not yet. First in Paris. And they told him to memorize where he was going, make his way to Paris, and destroy any remnant of it.
Of the address, yeah.
Of the address. So he said he packed up things. He got to the train station, and they questioned him, why do you have all, he would say, why do you have all of these khaki shorts? Because he was planning to go to Israel, but he said, well, I'm just going to Paris and I'm on holiday, and he kept, whatever, he got through. He got to Paris, he met the contact.
Khaki shorts.
But he called them cocky.
Okay.
He was British.
And he loved epaulets too.
Yes.
He never got over that.
Yeah. So then he meets the contact in Paris, and they give him another secret contact in Marseille. Mm-hmm. Right? So he goes to Marseille and he meets with them, and again, they tell him to go to Grand Arenas, which was a DP camp in the south of France for training.
Yes.
So he went there, and he trained along with Holocaust survivors. He said it was
his first encounter.
Real encounter. It was very hard for him. Yeah. But he was training, and his intention was to be a pilot, and so they actually flew him to Israel rather than him taking the boats with everyone else, which was a very different twist on.
But his brother took the boat, and what was it called? The name of the boat?
I don't remember.
Is there like an Alta D?
No, he was not on the Alta D. That's you remember that because that's a very famous story, but no. So anyway, he trains there. I don't know how long, but then
he gets to Palestine.
He gets there.
It's before the declaration.
No. This was after. It's already 1948.
So he gets to Israel.
Israel, right?
It's already existing.
Israel is existing.
So
the war's on.
Okay.
And he gets there. They fly him in, and they send him to a base called Telavitsky. And so he's there. Right when he arrives, and he starts asking around. I'm looking for my brother, Ivor. Has anyone met a British guy who's here? He's been fighting. He's been here since 1947. And they say, oh, Ivor is in the base hospital. He was just wounded in Fallujah. He's got a bullet in his chest, and he's about 250 yards from here.
And they couldn't remove the bullet because his heart would stop.
Okay. Yes.
I have to just add little tidbits.
Absolutely.
I'm never going to get in here.
This is a discussion. Okay. This is a discussion.
No,
but he had a bullet in his heart that he just passed away a few months ago, but they never could remove it because they tried and his heart stopped. So they just left it.
So he had a bullet in his heart.
It wasn't in his chest. It was in his chest.
When he passed away? He just
90.
He just not.
Yeah, we just saw him in June, and he
Yeah.
passed away, I think, in July
But he
or
kept
August.
a diary of his time there, and it's actually my dad's book. Yeah.
So he goes. He's in Televinsky.
He's in
And so
television.
his brother that he went to go
Right.
look
Walks
for.
in and
He walks
finds his
in,
brother.
and his brother says, "What are you doing here?" And he
Yeah.
says, "I've come. I'm going to be a pilot. I've come to
going
fight.
Czechoslovakia.
I'm going to
You're
Czechoslovakia."
To
train.
fight
Yeah.
spider moths. What
No.
are they called?
Tiger
Tiger
moths,
moths.
Spitfires, and
Yeah.
The
Messerschmitts.
first Israeli Air Force
Yes.
course was in Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And Hugo, the guy that I was telling you
Yeah.
about, was in that class. There were 20 people from Europe, 20 people from Israel. They were separated, but this is the first fighter pilot
Yes.
course. But anyways,
So that's
your brother
he
finds
thinks.
your brother.
He finds his brother, right?
Ivor.
And Ivor says, "You're too young to be here. Maybe you can join Gadna." And
Well, he's like, tell me more. He got all the information.
right, right.
from my dad.
And he says, "Nope. I'm. They're gonna send me soon."
And our dad is so stubborn. Like there was no way he
Right.
wasn't going to do it, even though he was
Right.
couldn't.
Right, right. Literally, we know he couldn't fly a plane. I mean, he
believed he could.
He
That's all
believed
that
he
mattered.
could because he was 16 and he
But
thought he could do
also wanted
anything.
to
Be
get out
part
of
of
England.
it.
And
Right.
find maybe the only brother that he's in contact that he
Well,
has.
who was
anything
really
for.
honestly like his dad.
Yeah.
I mean, as it turns out, he was all his siblings. He was the only one he had a relationship with till the time they died.
Yeah.
It was Ivor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were Zionists.
Sure.
From
I
the
understand,
get-go.
but
Right.
There's a quest here of a 16-year-old kid.
Yes, he's on a hero's quest,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
So
he finds Ivor.
So Ivor's in bed. He as Suzanne said, they operated on him like in the field in Fallujah, because he had been shot through the back and it lodged in his chest somewhere. And so they had opened him up and they had taken the bullet out and his heart stopped. And they panicked and they put the bullet back in.
I just said that.
Well, I know, but I'm putting it in order. He's going to edit it.
No, he's not.
Oh, you're not editing.
That's
Okay.
why I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
It's good.
But
Okay,
All right,
keep going.
I did add the piece. It didn't happen in Televitsky. It happened.
I know that.
I know, but he doesn't.
Okay.
Now I do.
Okay.
Okay.
So they put it back in, and they thought he was going to die. I mean, there was no reason why he was going to live through that. They send him back to Televitsky, and so now our dad.
He gets all
Goes
the
in.
information from our dad, and he's like, will you just come back here tomorrow? I want you to meet some people. Right.
Right, and I need to rest.
Yeah, I need to rest, but come back tomorrow. I want to hear more about this, and I want you to meet my,
Friends.
officer and all this kind of stuff. So my dad comes back.
No. He got a call from over the intercom saying, report to the office. And he goes into the office, and there's a guy named Lester Gorn, who was the commander of the unit that Ivor was in. This is the first, I have to find it exactly. First Troop, 4th Anti-Tank.
Okay.
And they called themselves the Anglo-Saxon, and they were a democratic unit. So they were marching to their own orders. They weren't totally coordinated with the Israeli units or the Haganah or anything. They were kind of doing their own thing because these were World War II people.
Who was the commander?
So this guy's name was Lester Gorn.
Okay.
He was Dad said he was wearing a Brooklyn Dodgers cap,
Yeah,
and
they
he
were
was
kind of ragtag.
big ragtag, not in a
Toughies.
uniform. So he says, "You're coming with me," and our dad says, "What are you talking about?"
I'm going to Czechoslovakia. They're waiting for me. They need me. And he said, "No, you're coming with me."
Right.
Because Ivor had sent word that there's no way my brother is going to Czechoslovakia. So they kidnapped him and they took him down.
Yeah, they just
to the
stuck
Negev.
him
They
in.
just grabbed him and they took him.
Right. So his
And
first few.
that's how it all began.
Yeah,
My
his
dad's-
first few weeks in the war, he didn't even have a gun. He was with this unit, mad because he was AWOL from the Air Force and became the replacement of Ivor in this
Anglo-Saxon.
in the Anglo-Saxon unit. So they were in the Negev, fought. He said that let's see. He didn't have a rifle the first few days, and when he did, he was given a German Mauser with a swastika on it. So that was his first gun. They were supposed to, I guess, steal artillery from the tanks, and they didn't really have much with them. So he said their first weapon was they called it Woody. It was fashioned out of wood. It didn't really do anything, and so they would stand in front of it and throw grenades to try to let the enemy, I think the Egyptians at that time, think that they had this cannon or something, but that was their big weapon. And our dad always said that, but the secret weapon was ein brera. There was no choice. It was figure it out or die, and Israel would not exist. So that's where he spent the war with that unit. And then the war ends, and there's all these machalniks in Israel. And they didn't help them, according to our dad. And in fact, he said they weren't given much money, they had nowhere to sleep. And so he and his friend were squatting basically in the Machal Club and in
Yarkon Street.
Yeah. And yep.
And then I remember he said that they were like given just a couple days to decide, are you staying or going?
Right.
You have to choose.
But before that,
Jump ahead.
Yeah, right. But that's good info. His friend, he was hanging out with his friend, and they were squatting in barracks, anywhere they could find to sleep. They had obviously no jobs, no money, no food. Him and his friend named Yitzhak Ashiri were trying to win money in the Machal Club by playing checkers, and they had some scam going to try to get money. He said it was just enough to buy sandwiches, and so they were caught one night sleeping in barracks, and the police came in and took them and drove them miles and miles outside of Tel Aviv and dropped them in the middle of nowhere. And he kept saying, but we were soldiers and we fought for Israel and no one's helping us and we don't even know where we are. And they said, too bad, that's illegal. So they were left, and he said they walked the whole night to try to find somewhere to go. And he went, when he finally got back to Tel Aviv, he contacted Monty Jacobs, who was a reporter with the Palestine Post, and he told him the whole story. And there is somewhere an article of our dad being interviewed by this Monty Jacobs, talking about this, how horribly the Machal volunteers had been treated, and that, why wasn't anyone helping them? So he said after this article appeared, there was a big outcry, and finally they were given a little money and they were allowed to sleep in the barracks. But then they were told, okay, you have to give up your passports and decide if you're going to be Israelis or you need...
And they gave him no time.
Right, leave the country. Mm-hmm. So he had a girlfriend at Kfar Bloom, who I think he was 16, 17 maybe at this point, and he thought, well, am I going to move to a kibbutz and marry this girl? I'm only 17. I don't know what my future is. I did this thing. Ivor had already been sent back to England, presumably to probably not last very long, but he did. And so he was all alone. He was so young, and he thought, no, I'm not ready to make any sort of commitment to this girl or a Bloom. I don't think I want to live on a kibbutz.
Well, plus all the excitement was over.
The excitement was over,
and the hardships began.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it didn't look like it was going to be easy.
Was not, the 50s were not a good time to be living in Israel at all.
And I think he wanted to go back to school too. He started college.
Well, so he's
he dropped.
So when he left, he was 16. Even though high school kind of ended, in England around that time, but he really was not educated beyond 16.
So when does he leave Israel?
So he left in 1949.
Okay.
And he went back to England and decided really quickly. I mean, he went to go see Ivor.
There was nothing there for him.
The interesting thing about Ivor, so he had, before he left for Israel himself, and then it was Palestine, he had gone to the sister, Pamela, and said, I'm never coming back. I'm going to Israel. Ivor. I'm staying forever. Here's all of my money. He had been the one who had been working and as an apprentice, as accountant. He gave her everything and said, I'm never coming back.
So when he came back,
he went to Pamela and said, I'm wounded, I need some help, and she wouldn't help him. This is how messed up this family was. She wouldn't even take him in for the night. So
That's what war does.
Right.
and being orphaned.
Yeah.
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 So he had to recuperate, restart his life. Luckily, he met a wonderful woman, and they were married, and he survived the whole thing. But when our dad went back to London, really all he had was the one brother, and he was starting a whole new life. So staying in London was not optional for him. And he had such horrible memories from that. So he decided to go to France and learn to speak French.
Went to the Sorbonne.
Right, and he lived kind of in a commune.
He was kind of, bohemian and was living the life. And
Drove around on
and,
yeah.
Cool cat.
Yep.
And then he met some. Well, this isn't really part of the war. You still want to hear it?
Well, we're going to end pretty soon, but just let's do it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, he met some girls who were American students and who said, well, there's the whole Canada thing. But eventually these girls he met, who were also students, said, you have to come to America, you have to come to America. And then so he illegally actually came to America through Canada to look up these girls. And that's how.
Well, and then he lived with them. The people he lived in the commune with in France.
He found them in the States?
Yes.
Yeah, no, they
Where were they?
LA.
LA. They opened up their home, and he lived kind of in a commune there.
And he had like 3 jobs, and he went to LACC.
Very quickly,
yeah.
your father eventually settled in the United States.
Yes, in Los Angeles.
What did he do?
Well, but can we just tell you the reason when they found out, I think he was a student, he was kind of working the system.
Yeah.
And then we also have to tell you how he actually met my mom, because that's kind of a fun story. But he was working the system when they found out that he was an illegal alien. They said, we're sending you back. He's like, well, I don't have any money, so if you're going to send me back, you're going to have to pay for it. And they let him stay. So that's how.
Right, but he was not a citizen.
No, he was not a citizen. They were going to deport him, and he said, then you're paying for it. I have nothing. And I have nothing there.
The only connected part with our mom is that, so our dad was very active in the Hillel, the Jewish Student Union.
All Things Israel.
Right, All Things Israel, because obviously. And so they asked him to chair the 10th anniversary of Yom HaAtzmaut at UCLA. And he was supposed to MC this event. And
no, he wasn't. Bob Crane
right.
from Hogan's Heroes
Yes.
was supposed to be the MC. Do you know Bob Crane from Hogan's Heroes? Okay. And he was supposed to be the MC, and then at the last minute, he was a no-show. So they asked my dad, who organized the event, and they said, you have to do it. We're stuck. So he MC'd this event. Apparently, he was a huge hit, and my mom was the coat check girl at this event. And everyone thought my dad was all that because the accent and the Israeli, experience and the connections and.
So they met at the 10th anniversary of Israel.
So this was 1959.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when did they get married?
It was 1958. They got married in 1959.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
They might have got married in 58 because Mina was born in 59. Our sister was born in 59.
I'm going to stop right now.
Yes.
And what I want to do, that was perfect.
And I have one funny little thing to tell you, though, about my dad.
Sure.
Am I being filmed?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my dad used to always say, oh, smoking's so bad for you. Smoking can kill you. And then he goes on to say how he almost lost his life crawling out of a foxhole to get a cigarette.
Oh, yeah,
He was in
that
Israel.
is
That's
true.
how smoking can almost kill you. Like trying to get a smoke.
It's like my grandmother used to say, I'm turning this off, but my grandmother used to